Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast, the podcast dedicated to simplifying the commercial real estate industry for the masses. Each week, we sit down with industry experts to dissect the many facets of commercial real estate and extract valuable lessons you can apply to your business. Whether you're a new or seasoned business owner or investor, the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast will be your go-to resource for all your commercial real estate needs. Now, here are your hosts, Raphael Collazo and Jeff Walston.
Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast. I'm your host, Raphael Collazo, here with my co-host, Jeff Walston. How's it going, my friend?
Going wonderful, man. Business is good. Everything's going well. I am planning my wife's birthday party this weekend, as you know, because you're coming. So that's been eventful. Let's put it that way, because it is an event, and that's wow. It's kind of out of my. I enjoy it, but it's definitely something that's weighing on me a little bit. Ready for it to start and be over, but it should be very, very exciting though. So
definitely.
What about you, Raphael? How about you?
Not much, man. I appreciate the puns, you know.
Yeah.
So that's always nice. And as you know, I'm a big dad jokes fan. So anytime there's a funny pun or a dad joke, I'm all over it. But yeah, as far as the business side is concerned, still pretty active, especially in particular on the retail side, which is, you would think it would not be the case, but it's been pretty active. And for restaurants and retail, it's definitely a very active market here in Louisville, Kentucky. And speaking of retail, we had the honor of talking to James Cook, who is, the America's Director of Research for JLL. So there's very few people on this planet that are as well-versed in the retail sector in the Americas than James is. He covers markets all across the country, including the major markets as well as some of the secondary and tertiary markets. So as far as the, discussion points that we had throughout the podcast was that, what got him interested in the commercial real estate industry to begin with. He kind of shares a story of how he was completely, he didn't know anything about the commercial real estate business and just kind of got in utilizing his degree in English literature and was able to leverage that into other positions in the research side. We kind of talked a little bit about a day in the life of a research analyst, in particular in his position. He's been able to build a pretty reputable podcast. He's done, he does events all across the country, speaking to professionals and executives about the retail industry from a variety of different standpoints, including grocery anchored, quick service restaurant, all these different facets within the retail space. We also talked a little bit about some of the lessons learned throughout COVID and how that's been applied now to the future of retail and how he sees it's evolving over the next 5 to 10 years. And then finally, we touched on his experiences with the podcast. He's built a pretty reputable and large-scale podcast called Where We Buy, related to the retail sector. And, we kind of touched on some of his experience starting out with it and some of the lessons he's learned and relationships he's built through just operating within that space. And so, I thought we had a great discussion. I'm in the retail sector pretty heavily on the brokerage side, and Jeff has operated in the retail sector a lot on the construction end. And so I thought it was a really engaging conversation, and I gained a lot of value from the discussion. What about you, Jeff?
James is just a wealth of value, knowledge, body of knowledge that he just, especially in retail. And like you said, he's definitely a storyteller by heart, and you can tell, and he enjoys it. You can see the passion when he talks about it. So I can't wait for you guys to listen to this episode. But I also I wanted to say that we do this is trying to get our knowledge out there and share other people, their stories, and for learning. So we do this free, and we don't ask hardly anything from you guys, but we do have two asks, and I want to share one of them right now. Is my ask today for you guys is to share this podcast with someone. It could be anyone interested, remotely interested in real estate. It could be your real estate agent that you have. I mean, it could be your friend. You think, oh, well, there's a lot of good episodes on here that we have, and we would really appreciate that. So that is my ask of you guys. And I wanted to say also, we appreciate all of the reviews that you've been given. We definitely appreciate that, because it has helped us grow our podcast. But I'm going to start asking to share it with one other person, just one. So Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And we've at this point we've recorded over 70 episodes. So there's plenty of them to choose from. So go back through the Rolodex, or the directory of all the different episodes we shared. And if you see one that you think one of your friends or someone in your industry would value, feel free to share it with them as well. And I'll ask the second piece that we like to ask is for a review. We've seen a significant uptick in our downloads as a result of you guys leaving reviews. So if you guys don't mind, if you guys are driving, wait until you stop the car. But if you have a chance, just go to Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star review, and then tell us a little bit about what you want to hear next. We are always looking for inspiration for guests and topics to discuss on the podcast. So feel free to let us know on that front as well. So thanks again so much for everything you all do and for your support over the past year and a half we've been doing the podcast. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into this episode. Well, hey, James, great to see you this fine afternoon.
Hey, it's great to see you both as well.
Awesome. Well, for those of you guys who don't know, James is actually tuning in not too far away from us. He's actually in Indianapolis. So, just a few hours away. And we were kind of talking offline about some of the activity that's going on in Indianapolis and this region as a whole. So.
Yeah, it's a fun city. And it goes beneath a lot of people's radars too. I feel like, you go to New York, and unless somebody's from the Midwest, they don't even really have a sense. Other than the 500, people don't really have a sense of what Indianapolis has to offer.
Yeah, no, for sure. And most of the people when I talk to, and I've had the chance to live in DC. I went to school in Phoenix, and those types of markets as well. And most of the time when people think the Midwest, they think of like Chicago.
Yep.
Tennessee, Nashville's become more of a hot topic over the last several years as well. But you're right. Indianapolis is one of those markets that's not necessarily looked at as much. And I'd even wager to say Cincinnati, and to a lesser extent, Louisville. I mean, we're definitely smaller than both of your guys, but there's definitely cool things happening in the area as well. So.
Yeah, they're unkept secrets. And for now, cost of living is very reasonable too, which is what I love.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the big reasons why I decided to stay in the market. Like I said, I've been around various different cities across the country, and there's a lot to offer. The Midwest has a lot to offer, as they say. But first off, we're just super honored to have you. Like we said offline, I believe you're the first guest we've had that has been in the research part of commercial real estate. So we're really excited to dive into your background and get a feel for the work that you do on a day-to-day. So what we typically do when we first interview people is we like to learn a little bit more about the person who's across the table from us. So if you don't mind kind of sharing your backstory, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. So I started in commercial real estate in '99, and I was pretty fresh out of college. And everybody assumes I studied economics or real estate, but actually I have a degree in English literature, which I think really helped me a lot because you guys know this business is about storytelling, and it's about creating the vision for things that haven't been created yet, or saying how things could be, but they're not yet, and convincing people. So that turned out to be a secret skill for a business that I didn't know anything about. Like when I applied for my first real estate analyst job, when I was fresh out of college, and you mentioned Phoenix, this was in Phoenix where I was living at the time, for Colliers, the brokerage Colliers there in Phoenix. I'm sorry, no, this one was Insignia. That was the brokerage I worked at before that. Anyway, not important, but I didn't even know what commercial real estate was. I was like, is this houses? What is this? So I had so much to learn. And the reason why I got the job is because of the writing skills. They were looking somebody to write Phoenix market reports. And just sort of over the years, I learned first that market, then the business. I was doing GIS for a while in addition, but really for the past 10 years or so, I focused all of my work on retail. And so I led the research group at Colliers nationally for a while. And now I'm at JLL leading retail research. So we have a small retail research team that covers North America. So we're generalists. We cover all types of retail real estate in a whole bunch of major cities in North America, but it's awesome. My team tracks all kinds of different trends. We get to write reports on luxury, grocery, quick service, what's going on in urban retail right now. There's always something fun to talk about. And the best part for me is the travel. like getting to go to these markets, meeting with clients. I get to speak at a lot of events. And, to this day, I mean, I've always just been telling the story, whatever that is. That's definitely my job.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, and you alluded to the storytelling piece. I mean, I feel like in any type of, any business in particular, you have to be able to tell a story in order to build trust with individuals and ultimately get your point across in a way that leads to either a sale or, convincing someone of making a decision to benefit you or the organization. And so I agree with you on that front. And, so interesting to hear how you got into this side of things. I actually am an engineer by trade. I was an industrial engineer and got into the software business for a while. And I learned, communication and writing skills, not in college, because that was my most hated subject. I actually learned through writing a blog, and then I got into writing books, and now I've been doing Toastmasters for many years. So learned about public speaking and communication that way as well. So, I mean, I feel like it's definitely a very valuable skill to have, is being able to communicate effectively. So,
yeah. And I think just the other part of that, like the flip side of the coin, is authenticity. Like people talk about like marketing and you're trying to communicate a story, you're trying to BS somebody. And that's not true at all. Like, I think the biggest part of me, because I'm a researcher, is I find the truth and then I convey that to others. So I think that's part of what might distinguish me from, some others who are really just about getting a deal done. Like, I'm really interested in figuring out what the truth is.
Absolutely. But I will even say in that regard, being able to be authentic when you have interactions is valuable in any regard, because most people can tell if you are, trying to sell snake oil, right? At least I like to think that I can tell as well. So definitely a good point.
Yeah. So kind of curious on why commercial real estate and not necessarily residential. I know that the research, I know that part intrigued you and stuff, but why did you actually go into the commercial real estate sector in general?
Jeff, I did not know anything. I was so young. It was no joke. At the time, I was managing a U-Haul, like a truck rental place. I wasn't even the manager. I was the assistant manager. And I was like, it's a hard job. It's hot. It's a lot of work. And I was like, if I can just use my college degree to work in an office where I can sit to work and type on a computer, I will be happy. Now, of course, I got a lot more than that, but this was just the first job that said, hey, we want you to write things in an office. And I was like, oh, writing. I love writing. So and I don't think that opportunity would have been in residential real estate, because residential brokerages don't usually have research departments.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, I know. And like you said, I think that, the data points, depending on, which market you're in and everything. I mean, especially in the commercial real estate space, I feel like it's so data driven, especially the clients demand the data to be able to support different, functions within the business. And so, I would say there's probably more of a premium as far as the desire for relevant data to make decisions in the commercial side. So,
yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I mean, in residential, what school district are you in? What are the comps? It's not nearly as much. Where if we're working with a client who's, looking to open, I don't know, like 30 new restaurant locations in the Midwest, I mean, they've got very specific demographic target profiles. We've got to use all these tools to figure out, where those people live, and, make sure there's no cannibalization there. And there's just a bunch of different data and tools that we use.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. So one of the things that I think would be helpful for the audience too, because our audience, just to give you some ideas, is really all across the commercial real estate landscape. We've had brokerage, we have people in the banking side, we have people over on the construction side as well, and development. But, as far as the research analyst side is concerned, could you walk us through maybe a day in the life of what you do on a day-to-day basis, to provide some context to, the job itself?
Yeah. And I would say I'm very unique now. Like, I've kind of created this very specific niche. There's probably only like a couple of other people in North America that have my exact job of the retail research lead, where, I have a team that writes reports on a bunch of different retail and retail real estate trends that are of importance to our clients. So what's the future of luxury retail? What new technology is changing restaurants? When will tourists come back to shop in the cities? So we kind of like ask all our clients what their burning questions are and then write reports about them. So that's what I and my team do as far as like report writing. Then I'm also out speaking at a lot of events, also doing consulting projects, like for-fee consulting projects, and meetings with clients. So we might have a client, I'm trying to think of an example, who owns a bunch of shopping centers. Let's say they're grocery anchored shopping centers, and they're kind of really curious about what the future, or worried about, is grocery sales going to go away as people go out of the pandemic and they go out to eat more, so we'll dig into the data and try to answer their question. And the other fun thing that we do is we produce a podcast and a weekly video show. The podcast is called Where We Buy. And just every week I do an interview with a retail or retail real estate executive, expert. It might be somebody, I've done like small business people who just have one location just to hear what it's like to do that. And then I've done CEOs of different like major, large retailers, like the CEOs or, the head of development. So it's kind of all over the place. And then we also do a weekly video stream called Everything We Know About Retail. And that goes live on YouTube and LinkedIn every week. So it's, again, this is the recurring theme. It's storytelling. Like we're gathering all this information and sharing it as widely as possible.
That's awesome. And I love the fact that you guys do all that stuff digitally and obviously put it in an environment where it can be consumed with a broader audience, because, again, I think that the more people who hear this information, the better it is for ultimately yourself and your clients and really the industry as a whole, because I've always thought, especially when I first got into the business, that there just wasn't enough content out there, outside of just the major houses, that provided their quarterly reports. Like there wasn't as much on the podcasting front. There wasn't as much on the video front, on the YouTube side, live streaming, webcast, et cetera, at least that I saw when I got in. And I've been in it for about 3 years now. And now we're starting to see a lot more people coming to market with different, offerings as far as the podcasting side, YouTube, et cetera. And it's given me a lot of optimism as far as, the future of the industry now that more information's available. So
I know that there are people out there definitely gaining value for all these, as you put it, James, as their stories, but all your research and all the work that you've done, I know a lot of people wouldn't even take the time or don't have the time to do that. But so I know that you're giving tons and tons of value out there to the real estate, and commercial and retail and all that. So one of the questions that kind of leads up to that is like the lessons learned, basically through the pandemic. Can you kind of go through some of those? And it can be 1 or 2, 3 points that you've learned. It don't have to be all of them. So,
okay. So let me ask you this: things that we've learned about sort of retail, or things that I learned personally about myself? Because I got both answers.
Okay. Well, let's start with the retail, and then we can dive into the personals as well. Yeah.
Yes. So, I mean, when lockdowns hit, it was funny. It was kind of like silent for a few days, and then I was busier than I've ever been in my life. Because typically I would travel and meet with clients, but now that it was all virtual, I could do back to back, client meetings, webinars, all that stuff. And everybody just wanted to know what's happening, what's going on. So we started tracking very closely who was paying their rent. At first, that was the big question: who's paying rent?
Yeah.
And then it's funny. The big learning was the American consumer is not going to be stopped by any pandemic. Like we had 1 quarter of kind of bad numbers, and then retail growth just shot back. Another thing that we learned is that even though people enjoyed the freedom of shopping digitally, that also reversed as we came out of the pandemic. So we had this huge increase in online grocery. That was huge, like click and collect. That's actually gone down. since we've come out of the pandemic. Like as a percentage of all retail, like online has gone down. So we kind of learned that for the most part, as much as people think they buy everything online, that still the vast majority of dollars are spent. And I want to say the latest numbers are 14% are spent online and the rest is spent in bricks and mortar. So that's really high. Yeah. It's funny, like one more thing about the consumer, everybody was not doing like vacations. So Home Depot sales went through the roof because everybody spent that vacation money on, building a porch or something, or remodeling their kitchen. And that's starting to reverse itself now too. So people are going back on vacations again. People are eating out more again. And some places like Florida, dining out is now bigger in Florida than it was in 2019, like is totally recovered. In a lot of places, it's pretty much back.
That's amazing.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and in Florida in particular, they've been, pretty, I mean, obviously through their legislation and everything else, it seems like a lot of companies are starting to relocate to Florida as well. Obviously you hear the different headlines for some of the larger corporations, but even locally, I know in Louisville, a lot of people, there's Destin's kind of like the destination for a lot of people to go travel and vacation. And it seems like it's a growing market overall. So yeah.
James,
and go ahead, Joe.
I was going to say, I would have never predicted those numbers on the retail, people coming back out to brick and mortar.
Yeah.
I thought that the pandemic was that's shocking to me that the pandemic was going to raise up those online shopping. People are going to, just the convenience of it and keep doing it. So that's awesome numbers. And I'm glad to hear that people are actually going back out, and maybe it was the pent up, everyone had to stay home. And now you're just like, I want to go out, at least go in there and touch my shirt that I'm going to buy.
I think that's exactly a big part of it. Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. And you can maybe even talk to this a bit too. How have you seen as far as the space demands? Because that's another thing that blew up during the pandemic, and even pre-pandemic, was the industrial sector, and how now from the logistics standpoint, I know Amazon announced that they're going to be pulling back a bit as far as their commitment to space. They were announcing that they were going to be subleasing a significant number of square feet within the Americas. I don't know. Have you seen how that has impacted as far as the retail landscape as a whole? Those announcements?
Well, so just going back in a little bit, like when COVID hit, like everybody wanted to lease an e-commerce distribution warehouse. Like that was the hottest real estate in the world, just industrial, e-commerce. And we thought, oh boy, nobody's going to want to lease retail. And again, it was true for a couple of months, but we had, like, our clients went gangbusters by 2021. Like we did amazing, and it was all fast, like quick service restaurants, fast casual. It was all suburban retail. So the city continued to be very slow because, people weren't working in the city. But the neighborhoods in the cities were doing well. But where all the growth was in the suburbs. And it was just amazing. We were just shocked. We knew there'd be a recovery, but we didn't know how strong and fast it would be. And so now that's somewhat subsided. There's definitely some headwinds because of the economy, like inflation is not good. I think there's a lot of people are worried we're going to go into a short recession. That kind of remains to be seen. So it feels like there's a bit of a pullback on those expanding retailers that were looking for like those, suburban locations. But things are still not bad. So, I mean, that's kind of where we're at now. Like it's actually not bad of a story. Most of our clients are still, looking to expand.
That's awesome. Yeah, no. And I do a good amount of retail here locally as well. And I've kind of seen similar, I guess, trends as far as the clients that I work with, especially on the restaurant side. Yeah. Obviously the build out has dropped off significantly, obviously with supply shortages and issues as far as, sourcing the material, increased labor costs and everything else. The cost to build out a space has been astronomical and just continues to increase. So a lot of my clients now that are on the restaurant side are looking for second gen spaces. And it's just impossible to find. I mean, you can't, if it's in a reasonable area, then, good luck. If as soon as they list it, there's 3 or 4 people just coming right at it. So,
Wow.
yeah, it's pretty impressive. But so one of the things that we wanted to ask you, obviously, we've kind of had some lessons learned from COVID. COVID was definitely one of the unique, times in our lifetime. Hopefully, we won't have to see it again in our lifetime. But again, there's some lessons learned from it, and we've definitely evolved as an industry through that time period. Where do you see, I guess, the future of retail going? And if you can kind of project out, let's say 5 to 10 years, if you had to look in your crystal ball, what would you think?
Yeah. So well, first off, I was kind of making this point that a lot of spending, that had gone online was going back into bricks and mortar. It's not like we're going to go back to this world before the internet. I mean, there is no doubt that online retail is going to continue to grow, especially as it becomes cheaper and easier. There's more technology that makes it less expensive. So the future of retail is smaller. And Raphael, I'm sure you've seen that already. Just the footprints of QSRs are smaller than they used to be. Quick service restaurants. So smaller footprints, more efficient stores, more focused on, if they're not value retailers, then they're going to be focused on delivering what you can't get online, which is, Jeff mentioned kind of touching the clothing that you're buying, but also delivering some kind of unique brand experience. So, I mean, there's all kinds of different experiments at this, but there's different, I don't know, Instagrammable installations, stuff that you can only do there. For me, I think the thing that stores offer the most, the ones that can do it right, are the in-person interaction with a knowledgeable salesperson, which websites try to replicate that with chatting, never get it right. I mean, I just, if I want to buy, a new suit, that's not happening for me online. I need to go talk to somebody about this suit, so whatever. At the end of the day, it's more human, more experiential, and smaller too. I think that store sizes are going to continue to, kind of shrink.
Absolutely. Have you found out that if maybe the storefronts themselves are shrinking, but maybe the back end, warehouse space is maybe growing a little bit because they're going online, or is that a trend as well?
That's a great point. And yes, certain, I'm trying to think of good examples of that, a grocery store, their floor space in many cases, and same thing with a Target too.
Yeah.
Their floor space is shrunk, but they'll carve out space usually at the front of the store for a staging area for digital pickup. So you'll see whatever they were selling that wasn't moving, they'll get rid of that and put in at a staging area. And the tough part is you have to have freezer. If you're doing digital pickup for groceries, you have to have a freezer, you have to have a refrigerator, and a staging area for dry goods, all right there within running distance of the parking lot. And usually, if you've been to grocery stores, all the freezers in the very back. So there is money involved in kind of doing that, doing the changing and adding that stuff to the front of the store.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. And a quick question pertaining to, obviously QSRs, but there's other retail concepts that may also incorporate, a drive-through component. Have you seen, I guess, a growing trend of, developers and investors that are seeking, properties that have that capability?
From an investor standpoint, oh yeah, just open air centers are the hot, retail property investment, usually often grocery anchored centers, but still could be a strip center, drive-throughs, whatever daily needs retail. And from the other end of it, from the restaurant operator standpoint, we did this weekly video show, and we just did a roundup today of all of the chains that are releasing new prototypes that are really small, usually drive-through only, and have from 2 to 4 pickup lanes. So it's all about pumping as many people through this little footprint as possible.
Yeah. What's that concept here, Jeff? It's scooters. The coffee spot.
Yeah.
They're popping up everywhere here, and it's literally, they're such tiny buildings. And there's also another concept that's like a really small grocery store,
It's a convenience store. It's like a farm something. Yeah. It's like Cow Convenient or something like that. But it's a convenience store. Yeah. It's pretty cool that these concepts are coming, James. It's like they're selecting these lots, doing all the mechanicals and stuff and building basically a drive-through, and then bringing these small little stores on a trailer and dropping them off, hooking them up, and boom, now you're ready to go. Yeah. And you have it's amazing that they're
there's a new Jimmy John's concept that's pick up and delivery only, and they're manufactured. They're like prefab, where they're just like assembled on site.
Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, it's amazing too, because as land costs continue to rise. I mean, that's one of the things in these larger metros is that getting an acre plot, to be able to do your standard layout is maybe not going to be feasible from an economics perspective. So if you can carve out a half an acre or whatever minimum amount of acreage you need in order to build the property and still maximize the sales for that parcel, I'm sure there's value there in the long run.
James, earlier, I know I kind of want to take a right turn here, and go back to what you were talking about earlier is your podcast, and it's Where We Buy. Can you tell us about your experience in hosting the show, and then some of the lessons learned, and even how it helped you advance your career?
So Where We Buy started for me as a real experiment, and this was a number of years ago. It was 2016, and nice. At the time I was like listening to a lot of podcasts, always loved listening to radio and audiobooks. Like I was like, oh, this is so much fun. I was like, well, let's see how hard this is to do. And the first couple episodes I recorded on the microphone on my iPhone and just uploaded them to SoundCloud. I've since deleted those episodes because they're so bad, but it got me to understand, at least just get going. And eventually like people are always like, well, what kind of microphone do I need? And and I'm like, listen, technology is the last thing you have to worry about. It's just about what the content is going to be, how regularly you're going to do it, the fact that you're going to do it week in and week out for a long time before you see results. Like that's a big part of it too. I'm sure you guys are aware of that. It takes a long time. It's a real incremental organic growth. So anyway, since, started doing that, taught myself to edit. Like it was a DIY thing. My research department didn't have anybody who knew how to edit. So it became like a weekend, Sundays I'd edit audio and stuff. And it's definitely taken off to the point where JLL now does put money behind it. As a matter of fact, there's a big annual conference that we do in retail real estate called ICSC, which some of your listeners are probably familiar with. Big conference. We just had it in Las Vegas I guess that was in May, and JLL has a big booth there. And so they put in a podcast, I guess you call it like a podcast stage. And so for 2 days at the conference, I booked in all these guests. It was awesome because there's so many people from everywhere. And we recorded a whole bunch of podcasts just live with people milling around and stuff. And we've been releasing those episodes every week, sometimes 1 or 2 a week since then. I called it the Retail Podcast Challenge because I recorded 13 episodes in 2 days and it almost killed me. I really have never been more tired than coming back from ICSC this year.
I can only imagine, man. 13. I think the most we've ever done is like 3 or 4, and it's like exhausting.
It's taxing. Yeah, it's taxing.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, so. I commend you on that. And, we've been doing this podcast for just over a year now, which is pretty awesome, and similar to you, we started pretty much bootstrapped and, kind of made it work. And now we've been, we got over 75 episodes. We built out the systems so that now my virtual assistant handles the editing and putting all the content out on YouTube and all the various other platforms and everything else. But that was definitely a gradual process over time. And then, like you said, getting the guests, scheduling everything, and again, this is I mean, obviously it's a conversation, but it's also, you're trying to extract the best possible information you can from your guests. And so you always got to be thinking of ways of how to carry the conversation, how to move it in a direction that, you think would be of value to the audience. And so that's a learned skill. It's not something that, happens overnight, but similar to what you said before, I mean, it's just about getting started and putting something out there. And I'm sure if we listen to your early episodes, it's probably a completely different, you're probably night and day difference than where you were when you started. So.
Yeah. And one last thing I would say, it does have to be a labor of love. To get through the amount of work and time before you see results, you really have to enjoy it. Thankfully, I love talking to people, so it's pretty easy for me.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah, and you get to interview some cool people. I'm sure during those 13 people that you interviewed were probably rock stars. Like all of them were probably rock stars.
Yeah. Right. It was easy to get in. I mean, who are some of just recently, Todd Zapolsky, he's a developer who is redeveloping downtown Napa, California into this awesome, like mixed use, super cool destination. Another one was George Chen, who does China Live, which is a Chinese food hall in San Francisco. And he's also like an award-winning chef. Yeah, I would meet some of these people without the podcast, but the podcast gives me a reason to. Another great one is one of the first things that got me interested in retail was a book called Why We Buy by Paco Underhill, which a lot of people are familiar with. It's it's a bestseller. And my podcast was a takeoff on his. The podcast is Where We Buy. I happen to be going to New York and I don't know him, but I sent him an email and said, hey, I do a podcast. Can I interview you? He's like, sure. So went over to his office, sat down with him for an hour, had a great conversation. I mean, these are doors that have opened for me because of the podcast. I feel really lucky.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, no, that book is revolutionary, really.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an unbelievable book if you guys haven't had a chance to read it. So one of the things I was curious to ask you is, obviously in your day-to-day, you're looking at reams of data to make determinations on, a variety of different sectors within the retail sector. What are some of the, I guess, data and references that you use in order to, draw those conclusions?
So it's a mix of data that we buy and data we collect ourselves. The data we collect ourselves that you really can't buy are things like lease comps, sales comps. I mean, you can buy some of this, but not to the level of detail that we need. So what else do we collect on our own? Oh, like retailer locations. Sales per square foot of individual retailers, because those aren't public. Stuff like that. So we have to collect, and that's just through talking to people and market knowledge. But a lot of the data is purchased. I mean, you're familiar with CoStar, like we buy that. And that shows you what's available for sale, for lease, what the asking rents are, the overall inventory of real estate. And then my favorite current one is Placer. Do you guys know Placer AI? So it's there's a handful of these new companies that track foot traffic. And it's basically, they get data from apps in the App Store and kind of normalize it, and not at the person level, but at the group level can look at flows of people. And so I can look at an individual, say, McDonald's location, and tell like hour by hour what the traffic is flowing in and out of that location. And again, it's not individualized, but I can see big picture what the demographics are, what neighborhoods they're coming from. And it's really changed just the level of demographics and the level of people flow like that I can get now. It's amazing. A big question that we get all the time is, when are retailers in the cities, like in CBDs, going to be doing well again? And the thing I use to track that, like traffic flow from week to week, is that Placer data. There's other vendors out there, but Placer AI is the one that we use, and we've been really happy with.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's another company local here to Louisville. It's called ElToro, and they do some location data and they can track impressions for different like advertising. So like if you have, obviously they utilize, I'm assuming similar technology in that, your iPhone or whatever phone, if you allow for sharing of data between whatever the app store and everything else, they can track, the potential impressions for a particular ad. So if you're driving by a billboard, it could say, okay, well, you have 50,000 or 40,000 potential impressions. If you are, walking by a stand at, retail area, same type of thing. So it seems somewhat similar in that, you could probably capture similar data to place your AI. So that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really cool. It's just to, talking about storytelling, it used to be just to get foot traffic numbers was very difficult. And now I can tell you, hey, this Saturday at this specific Target or this specific Walmart was better than last Saturday. Like that's amazing data.
Yeah. And now with obviously like you said, artificial intelligence and machine learning, like you can obviously predict as more data comes in, you have more accurate models that show, okay, well, this could be potentially what this is happening. And you can be pretty close to a degree, depending outside of, things that are outside of your control.
Right. But, like pandemics.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Well, James, to start rounding out our podcast, I just want to say that we really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your story. Like you said, you do enjoy sharing stories and giving stories. And so one of the questions that we do to start the round out is, what is one of the most impactful books that you ever read or listened to? Because I know you mentioned a couple books there and some podcasts and other things. So I just kind of curious.
Oh boy. Well,
it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be business
estate
or commercial. Yeah, it doesn't have to be real estate. It can be.
Yeah,
anything.
well, I'll tell you what. So I mentioned Why We Buy by Paco Underhill. If you want to read one book about retail to truly understand it, that is your book. It is probably like 20 years old now or more. Yeah, no, it's probably 25 years old. Still completely relevant. That's fantastic. What else is good? It's funny. I'm like, I have an English degree and I'm totally blanking out being on the spot here. Yeah, I probably should have prepared a little bit.
No worries.
And thought about it. What else is good? I just finished a book called The Art of Gathering, which is the theory behind putting on an event, be it a dinner party, being it a conference. And you read this book and you're like, I had no idea that you could put so much thought. It's almost like you're writing a novel, like you're casting a movie, figuring out how to put it on an event. So I would recommend that, The Art of Gathering. I wouldn't say it's life-changing, but I'm putting on some research events in the coming year, and it's going to allow me to totally rethink how I think about people gathering together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's great.
Nice.
Yeah, I know. And Jeff and I do like a in-person meetup locally, and there's a lot that goes into it. I mean, there's so many moving parts, and I'm sure you can gather some insights as to how you could effectively do it. And we're always looking to learn about ways to improve ourselves and our business. So appreciate the recommendations. So again, James, we greatly appreciate your time. I know you're super busy and you're hopping around to different places around the country to be able to gather appropriate data for your clients and everything else. One thing we typically ask near the end of our podcast is we like to ask our guests to contribute something to what we call the commercial real estate treasure chest. It's a repository of resources that we make available to our audience. And, typically we shared, we've had people share helpful PDFs, Excel sheets, eBooks, depending on whether or not they've written an ebook. So I wanted to give you the opportunity to what are you willing to share today?
Yeah, so 3 things, and these are constantly changing. I don't think one of the great things about retail real estate is it's going to be different next week. So one is our quarterly retail outlook report, which is a quarterly look at the state of retail real estate in the US. And I'll send you the link to that so you can share that in the treasure chest where we post those. We do a new one every quarter. And you want to know, hey, how are malls doing? It's in there. Hey, how's fast food doing? It's in there. Like we try to cover everything. So that's 1. 2, I mentioned it, the podcast, Where We Buy. The URL is wherewebuy.show, and we're in all the podcast apps. We do a weekly in-depth interview with awesome people all the time. And then the third thing is our weekly video live stream, where we cover usually 3 topics in retail and retail real estate. We just did one today about fast food drive-thrus. So, that's why that was in my head. And that's called Everything We Know About Retail. And the URL is everythingweknow.show.
Awesome.
Nice. Talk about value given.
Oh,
Thank
absolutely.
You. Yeah.
No. Oh, for sure. And we're going to go ahead and include those links in the show notes below. So if you guys are watching this on YouTube, it'll be in the description. If you guys are listening to this in a podcast format, whether Spotify or Apple Podcasts, it'll be in the description as well. So.
Yeah. And James, I know that people are going to want to reach out to you and talk to you about retail and probably other things as well, especially because you're giving out so much value. How should they contact you?
Yeah, the best way to get in touch with me is on LinkedIn. Just search for James Cook, JLL. There's a lot of James Cooks out there, but right now there's only one at JLL. And you'll recognize me. I'm the James Cook with all the retail stuff on their profile. And feel free to make a connection with a message. And I love talking to new people and learning.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Definitely. No, and we'll include that in the show description as well. So again, James, thank you so much for stopping by. We really do appreciate your time. Like we said, if you guys are listening to this or I'm sorry, if you guys are watching this in a YouTube format, we would greatly appreciate it if you can like and subscribe. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm and ensures more and more people can hear this message. If you guys will listen to this in a podcast format, whether Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we would greatly appreciate if you would stop by Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. We've seen a significant uptick in our downloads as a result of you guys doing so. So we would greatly appreciate if you could take a second to go there and leave us a 5-star review. So thank you all so much for stopping by, and we'll see you all next time.